There can be only one podcast, and may it be the Prince of the Universe. Hi, folks. I'm Matt.
And I'm Wes.
And this is Heath.
Let's talk wrestling again. Hey, and this time, will you talk, please, Wes?
Yes, this is going to be more
will you
of
say
a
things?
Balanced podcast.
It will be?
Yes.
Did you get podcast envy?
Yes,
I did. I did.
He did.
You
I
thought
did.
there should be more you.
Yes.
Who gave you these notes? Did Ralph give you notes?
No, he did not.
He did not.
He who should be named later.
Good one.
Thank you.
Wow. Okay.
I
good deal.
guest host on a couple of podcasts, and he gets all beside himself. So now
I'm telling you what.
he needs to talk more.
To be fair, you were just reading him the questions and having him answer.
Yes.
So I thought that's what you wanted.
Yes.
But
now-
now he wants to be the main attraction.
Okay.
No, I just want to make co-main event.
Okay. You just want him to tag you in.
Yes. Hot
By the
tag.
way, just to give props to this podcast, I let a friend of mine know about this who's a huge wrestling fan from back in the day. He loved it.
We had a lot of good comments. I don't know if you looked on YouTube. We had some good comments on it. So and I got an email or two about it. So a lot of people enjoy when we talked about wrestling. We did this for the Dark Side of the Ring. People love that.
Yeah.
And then we steer away from wrestling for a few months. Then we come back. It seems like we always come back. But this was an idea brought up by Wes before the boom. I think I may have come up with the title. I can't remember. Either way, though, we came up with the title.
It's all
and
a
Wes-
collective effort here.
Well, you put it together and everything, and it went well. And it went so well that we started going into other years. So we wanted to pause there, and we were at 1985. Is that correct?
84.
Excuse me, 84.
Yeah, we just scratched the surface of 84 when we talked about Hogan and the Sheik at MSG, and we talked about the Sheik kind of scratching the surface of his tights
And the
against
Sheik-
Hogan's back.
And the Sheik passed since
And the
last
Sheik's
week.
passed since our last podcast.
Yes, he has.
So he will never, unsheath the sword again.
Correct. No more camel clutches.
No more jabronis.
No
Yeah.
more jabronis. That's true.
He will not be touching his mustache on Earth.
I always want to know if the Persian clubs were actually real or were they not weighted. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, go look it up.
I thought you thought all of this was real.
Quick take though. Iron Sheik's best match.
Ooh. Honestly, I didn't see a lot of his matches because, one, I didn't have WWF at the time. So, but I would probably say, you can't.
Of what you know, of what you've seen.
The Hogan
That's
thing
fine.
doesn't count. I would say his little feud after the fact with Sergeant Slaughter.
Yeah,
Okay.
didn't they have a boot camp
Boot
match?
camp match. Yeah.
Yeah.
Boot camp match. Same for you.
Yeah, I saw
Okay.
that. It was good.
I think both of them bled, and it was pretty good. I saw him when I was younger, and he was in Mid-South for a cup of coffee, and that's really all I know about him.
Mid-South.
There you go.
Greatest of all.
There you go. Good. So
All right.
All right. So 84. Go, Wes.
So the first thing we were going to kind of cover, and we're going to start with WWF to kind of begin this, and then we'll go through all the territories to touch on everything.
And you got to start with WWF because now they're
They're
risen.
the last thing standing out of all
Yeah.
of this.
This
which
is their
kinda-
rise. This is where they gain power.
Correct. So on July the 14th, Black Saturday, the WWF buys the TBS time slot and really changes the face of what Southern wrestling was by putting a show in that is kind of, as they call it, in the can, where nothing is going to be in the studio audience. It's old WWF footage, and they quickly are met with a little bit of pushback. Wouldn't you say, Heath?
Yes, because you're talking about TBS, that 6:05 time slot. Georgia Championship Wrestling had been running by then a good 12 years, I would think. And that was a staple on Saturday afternoons.
It's wild because that would eventually obviously lead to the WCW and Ted Turner taking over because these were the years where that wrestling show saved his station, right?
Correct.
Which is why Ted Turner became a fan.
Yeah, when Ted started his little UHF station, it was Andy Griffith, wrestling, and the Braves.
Yep, that's all I had.
That was the big three.
And we're not talking about the championship Braves or going to the World Series Braves. We're talking about the 80s, we suck in the bottom basement Braves.
No,
And what was
70s,
interesting
even
about
worse.
it, too, was he was like paying for fees to do Braves games, and he realized, hell, I can just buy the Braves. So he just ended up buying them instead of paying for the
The
rights.
last owner to manage a team in an actual game.
I did not know that.
Yep.
I didn't know that either.
Yep.
You're like Peter Gammons tonight.
After that happened, they banned owners from managing their own games. But in reality, on paper, it was the actual worst baseball team in history at the time that he was managing, which is why they were losing. But the ball players, to their credit, loved him. Thought he was a nice guy. He's kind of a hands-off guy, and he was kind of down to earth, and the players loved that. But they banned it after that because they thought it was just bad business.
I bet Ted Turner was pretty cool back, He was
Supposedly he was-
Jane Fonda in the early 90s.
Supposedly he was pretty cool about everything. Obviously Jane Fonda and the Braves and WCW. I mean, he was a big...
He loved his wrestling.
Yeah.
Getting back to Georgia Championship Wrestling. No, it's good. So by '84, Georgia Championship Wrestling was still going on. Then all of a sudden, Jim Barnett, who was the main promoter, leaves. Jack and Jerry Briscoe, who had points in the territory, secretly sell them to McMahon. Ole Anderson, who had points in it as well, is left holding nothing, and he didn't even know it until it was too late. And then all of a sudden, Black Saturday happens, and here's Vince McMahon and on the show, and then all of a sudden you've got tons of country Southern people going, "Where is my Georgia Championship Wrestling?" It
switched without knowledge.
Switched without
Where's
knowledge.
Gordon Soley?
Wow.
Where's our Gordon Soley? Gordon Soley was probably the professor of commentators back in the day, still revered there. But so that went on for 8.5 months, and then Crockett came in, and
That's 1985. Let's slow the train down.
yeah,
All right, so last thing we're going to talk about on WWF is on December the 28th, which was actually my wedding anniversary, but I wasn't married then because I was 7, and that would be weird. Dr. D slapped John Stossel on 2020 and changed the face of wrestling going into 85 that we'll touch on.
yeah. Dr. D, being David Schultz, was a heel for the WWF. Pretty big timer there. He came in along with Hogan and Mean Gene Okerlund and a few others from the AWA.
John Stossel, an investigative reporter, pretty famous at the time with ABC, was it?
Yes, 2020.
ABC. Yeah, 2020. He did the investigative journalism, exploring different things, and one of the things was the mysticism: is wrestling real or fake?
Right, and supposedly Vince McMahon gave the order, and John Stossel said, "Is wrestling fake?" And Dr. D took liberties and knocked the hell out of him.
Yep.
And that was all over the news, everywhere. That was big time news. Not the way that Vince McMahon wanted it, because then right after that, all of a sudden, David Schultz is gone. He misses WrestleMania in '85, and he was right on the cusp
Of being one of the great ones.
Yeah, he was a scapegoat.
Yeah, too bad. John Stossel's still mad about that today.
Yes.
So the next thing we're going to go into is World Class, which is out of Texas. And February the 10th, David Von Erich dies in Japan, and which leads into the David Von Erich Parade of Champions in May, where the yellow rose was the flower of choice that night. And every time I say a yellow rose, I think of David Von Erich to this day. That's how
I do too. He used to
compared
have,
Really?
that was.
he
Yeah.
used to have a wrestling jacket on the back. It was the Yellow Rose of Texas. That was kind of his nickname. And he was in Japan touring at the time when he passed. And he was an heir apparent to be NWA champion. He was being groomed for the last about 3 years or so. He had the technique. He could talk. He was going to be a touring one. His brothers were obviously more athletic and better looking, but he got the wrestling savvy. So
Heath knows about good-looking wrestlers.
yeah.
That's to come.
Okay.
So he passes, and then a few months later, World Class has their biggest show ever, which is a tribute to David. And Kerry, his younger brother, beats Ric Flair for the title in front of 32,000 fans, which was the biggest in Texas Stadium for them at the time.
I bet.
And yeah, so it was, it was all set up. It was like, David's groomed. He's not here anymore. We have to give it to Kerry. Kerry only had it for 3 weeks. He was not going to be a touring champion. He couldn't carry it like Flair did.
It was out of respect for the family.
And the point was made.
Got it. That's nice. Nice gesture for Flair.
Yeah.
Which kind of carries over to a point we're going to get into in 85 also, which is a teaser for that. So the next thing we're going to talk about is out of Memphis. It's the debut of the Macho Man Randy Savage officially going into the Jarrett and Lawler promotion versus working for his father, which they had a 3-year-long feud at that point, calling each other out at the Waffle House and on TV.
It's great.
Yeah.
Not Facebook.
Before Facebook, we should mention. You call people out at Waffle Houses.
Correct.
Yeah, so
the good old days.
Yeah. So the Poffos being Randy, Laney, and his dad Angelo. Angelo always wanted to be a promoter and owner. They started up an outlaw promotion out of East Tennessee and Kentucky called International Championship Wrestling. And they ran against Memphis and whoever. They were not sanctioned by the NWA.
Oh.
7 years.
Outlaw promotion.
Yeah, they did this for 7 years. And, when you think of Savage now, you would think he just always was around and seen and whatever. 7 years he was in this little outlaw promotion just because, it was his dad's and stuff.
Shut up.
Yeah, and then they, end up losing money. They fold. They had been just cutting promos on Lawler and Memphis and all that. And Jerry Jarrett, to his credit, when, Randy comes a-calling, he sees money. And any good promoter, can overlook, certain things when the dollar signs are there.
It's about business, as they say.
Business, for
business.
Sure. And he brought him in, and he brought his brother in, and made money.
Yeah.
He had memorable feud with Jerry the King Lawler. There's a great angle out there when it was Randy and Laney against the Rock and Roll Express, and he pile drives Ricky Morton on the table. Nobody had ever seen somebody pile drive on a table before, so memorable angle from '84.
Stuck it to a Slim Jim.
Yes.
I think he showed Ms. Elizabeth the Slim Jim at that point. Or someone else was showing her a Slim Jim, and that's how he got her, correct?
No, she was already his wife by then. She was like the...
But how did she get broke into the business?
Beef jerky.
Honestly, I don't know. I really don't know.
Well,
I just know I've seen some old ICW tapes. She was already there during that time.
Maybe they were together then.
You can find some of the ICW on YouTube. The production is one of the most horrible things you would ever see. It is.
Does WWF not own their library? No one owns their library?
I don't think so.
That's surprising.
Well,
didn't McMahon go on a Pac-Man ramp
he still
for a
doesn't.
while?
He still doesn't have the Memphis tapes either.
Because nobody knows who owns Memphis. It's all up in the air.
Right.
Really?
You got Lawler. You got Jarrett. You got.
And they sold some of it to another guy in the 90s, and
I don't think he got the Portland territory either.
Huh. Okay.
So, but anyway.
All right.
No, I just the thing about why out of everything in Memphis, we talked about them in previous years. I just think Savage is such. I think he is the biggest star of the 80s that still does not get the credit he deserves because he worked with everybody that was big in the 80s and had a good match with everyone. He never had a stinker, and I just feel like that's something Randy took his profession pretty serious, and I think that's why he was a player the whole time.
Yeah, definitely a team player.
Yeah, prior to wrestling, like Dusty Rhodes was a great baseball player.
See, I never even knew that.
Yeah, he was a minor leaguer. And then, as with anything, found out at the time that he can make more money wrestling.
It's crazy. It's crazy how that happens.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is, of course, our favorite subject on this show when Heath is involved. It's Mid-South Wrestling.
Yeah.
Do you like Mid-South Wrestling?
I love Mid-South.
All right.
Now, is it true? Is this rumor or innuendos? It's called the way Tupac had Thug Life around his belly button. You have Mid-South.
I will neither confirm nor deny.
Okay.
We can lift up his shirt and
Do
find out.
you call what's below it the junior heavyweight title or the heavyweight title?
I'm going to say light heavyweight.
Light heavyweight. Okay. Do you strap it on, or is it something you just throw over your shoulder?
I got to cinch up on it sometimes.
Cinch up on it. I think that's an old Iron Sheik move with the Hogan match. So anyway, we're
Have you
gonna
ever had a tag team match? Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, please go ahead.
Have you ever had a tag team match with anyone wearing it?
I wish.
Whoever it was loser leaves the town. And they were from parts unknown. The biggest topics we're going to touch on, and Heath will give his 8-minute wording.
I will not go 8 minutes.
He said that. And
Is it a lumberjack match?
He will hold to an 8-minute match. I've talked to some of his opponents.
How long does an Ironman match go for you regularly?
Do you drop down and get it again?
Once.
Wow. Okay.
Once.
So
I
it's
can
more of
I
a
can hit
Goldberg
I can
match.
hit the ropes 5-6 times.
Okay.
So pins anywhere in the arena would count.
Falls count anywhere?
Falls count anywhere.
Yeah, quickly.
Is it quick count, you mean?
Faster than the Bushwhackers were thrown out of the Royal Rumble. I think that was 8 seconds.
I thought you were going to say quicker than a hiccup.
Well, I mean, okay.
Okay. So best year ever for
That's
Bill
a Royal
Watts.
Rumble.
The Midnight Express came in, and the Rock and Roll, which I think out of that, the biggest deal is Jim Cornette.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. No one argues that.
Well, Heath does.
What?
JYD leaves the WWF.
He just said absolute. Okay, go on.
He's changed his opinion.
That is not true.
He changed the belt like he did just then over his shoulder. JYD leaves for WWF high and dry. And of course, the big blow off, as we've used recently, the Last Stampede.
Yep. So the Last Stampede was the biggest moneymaker for Mid-South at the time. Sellouts all over the place. It was Jim Cornette had antagonized Bill Watts. Bill Watts slaps him on TV, one of the greatest angles ever. Then the Midnight Express beats him down. And then all of a sudden, Bill Watts decides he's going to come out of retirement. He needs a partner. And in comes Stagger Lee, who happened to be the Junkyard Dog under a mask, who had lost a loser leave town match, if I remember correctly. But they say it wasn't Dog, but Cornette says it was. Who knows?
Why would Cornette lie, though?
Exactly. So the stipulations of the Last Stampede match was basically if Watts and Stagger Lee won, they either put Jim Cornette in a dress or they put him in a diaper and made him suck a baby bottle. I was fortunate enough when they had that show at the Civic Center, I got to see Cornette in the diaper and the baby bottle.
Awesome.
The place blew up.
I bet it did.
It blew up.
I bet it's great.
Yep.
We need to even give Wes a shot at that Money in the Bank. What we call the money shot.
He's got to get the ladder first.
It's probably going to be a little pimp ladder, like a step ladder.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And next.
Well, that's going to be our wrap on
that's right. Okay.
1984. That's kind of where we're going to
All right, we can roll into
go
85.
into 85. But the biggest, what the takeaway that goes into 85 and really shows is the freight train of the WWF success, where everything that they are doing, the foresight that McMahon had, his ability to make big deals is paying off, and everyone is really left at the station.
So at this
watching
time,
it
it's
leave.
full steam ahead. McMahon has control of the spotlight, and it is solely on the WWF at this point.
I would say so, because he's took everybody's TV and he's beginning to take their top talent.
84 was probably the last.
WWF is in the lead, but other people are still in the race.
The territories were still going on. That would have been the last year that any of them, to me, would have made profits, because that was
Got it.
Mid-South's biggest year ever. And
Was
they're-
84, really?
84, when Rock and Roll and Midnight and all that stuff came in there.
Right.
That was their biggest money making ever. Crockett was close coming up the next year.
It becomes a two-person race at that point.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So 84, I would say, was goodbye territories. That's really, it all went downhill from there.
So now we move into 85.
We do. So in 1985, what we're going to touch on, we're not going to touch as many territories due to so much of the business really goes to either New York or the Mid-Atlantic NWA territory held by Crockett, because everything else is just slowly, like Heath said, going broke. So the first thing we're going to cover is the war to settle the score, which leads into WrestleMania number 1, which then leads into Saturday night's main event when network TV gets wrestling on it for the first time in decades.
Yeah, so you got a couple of factors going into that. So the war to settle the score was the title of a wrestling thing they had at Madison Square Garden. It tied in with MTV, which was hot as they could be in 84. So that was big for them to get
Heath,
coverage.
what year did you see MTV for the first time?
Probably 86, and that was just because I was at somebody's house and happened to see it. But on the regular after school, 89, 90, 91, when I would go to Western Auto in the afternoons after work where my mom worked, and I would sit and watch all the TVs, and I would turn all the TVs on MTV and watch Dial MTV. There you go.
Okay. Heath, is it true that when you watched Footloose, you wanted to be Kevin Bacon dancing in the barn?
Absolutely.
Can you imagine?
That ending sequence when they're having their prom,
Kevin Bacon.
the ending sequence when they're dancing, killer. But 84 was Purple Rain year, so God love Prince, rest in peace.
All right, we're going to dial it back now. Heath
started
gets
it.
emotional,
You started.
takes that belt off.
This is what it looks like when doves cry.
So the biggest thing, like he said, is with War to settle the score, we're going into WrestleMania where McMahon has really got everything as white hot as he gets it. We're going to go back to 84. Originally, it was supposed to be Hogan and T against Piper and Schultz. Or it was going to be Mr. Wonderful and Schultz.
Yeah, it was going to be one or the other. I'm not really sure, but I know that all of a sudden Cowboy Bob Orton, who turned into Ace, was their second, I guess you could say, for Piper and Orndorff. I'm thinking that Dr. D probably would have been in that spot. Could have interchanged. Him or Orndorff could have stayed either way. But you had that, and then
Schultz had all that time with Hogan.
Oh yeah,
in Florida when Hogan was breaking in, and he had all that time with him in Minnesota.
Go check out some Dr. D promos. You will enjoy them thoroughly. So obviously we got WrestleMania. We don't have to talk about that. Everybody knows about WrestleMania stuff.
Yeah.
But the other big thing was Saturday night's main event. That was wrestling back on a national network for the first time since the 50s.
Yeah.
NBC.
NBC.
When Saturday Night Live went dark for the summer, Vince stepped in.
Yep. So they ran 4 Saturday night's main events in 85. Monster ratings.
Did I see that we were getting a Saturday night main event?
Well, they call it that. It's just a house show.
It's just it's a thing.
Okay.
Now.
I mean, the
Which is-
sign at the Civic Center
Yeah.
is not working properly, so
Nice.
big sections of it were missing. But it looked like it may have been Saturday night main event.
That will be
Well,
this Saturday.
Make Monroe great
That would be
again.
this Saturday, as
Yes,
of
it
this
would.
podcast.
Or maybe
so.
at least good again.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, getting on NBC, being on MTV, WrestleMania obviously was a success.
He was
I
on
mean,
TBS still at that point, right before he left. So
Yeah.
he was on the major networks, including USA. So
Yeah.
he was everywhere.
He was getting coverage everywhere. Nobody could compare with that.
yeah,
Nobody
he's running
could,
away with it by this
Nobody
point.
could fight it.
But what
Only
was so
game in
smart
town.
is he saw how cable would outreach, and he hitched onto those biggest networks and was able to, regardless if you liked the product or not, you knew it then at that point.
Symbiotic relationship too, because those channels are trying to establish some precedence on cable.
Symbiotic, wow.
On cable. So yeah, we got to get in some programming that doesn't, that we don't have to run.
yeah, cable
Wrestling
still
runs
young.
itself. Wrestling has a track record. You're coming to us with a wrestling show? Yeah, we'll make a
Cheap
deal.
programming.
Yeah,
Yep.
cheap programming.
Yep.
So,
The thing that killed the territories for a lot is Vince would come in, like Wes said, sweep into the stations and say, hey, how much is AWA paying for this time slot? Okay, I'm going to double that. What's it all about? It's about money.
Money.
So, I mean,
And
there was no loyalty.
But a lot of that TV too was the stations were paying for it. So if they're paying the promotion and then Vince is like, well, I'll pay you. You just put mine on there.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day,
Nice
it's
deal.
kind of like what's kind of happened with media recently where it's just too much of the same person in charge and it kind of kills a lot of your creativity.
Yep.
So next,
Keep going. You're fine. Just flatten it out.
are you leaking?
No, just flatten it out.
Okay. So the next thing we're going to
There's nothing
talk
on it.
about is going to be JCP, which is Jim Crockett Promotions, because this is your next big dog in the fight. Jim steps in and buys the WWF out, gives Vince $1 million for the TBS time slot in April, which we find confusing because supposedly this money is what financed WrestleMania, but however, WrestleMania was in March, so it doesn't make any sense on how that would even make the timeline work. So there is some play in that, but regardless, Vince does lose that spot to Crockett, and the biggest thing that we felt was the Dusty Rhodes angle in the Omni, which was my first introduction into NWA wrestling, which led into the Hard Times promo, which is Dusty's most
Iconic.
iconic promo. It's on T-shirts, everything else. And then what we'll also say, what Heath agrees or had said, and I agree, the greatest I Quit match of Tully and Magnum that year at Starrcade.
Yeah, so go out there and see the angle where I believe Flair is getting beat up by the Russians in a cage. Dusty Rhodes jumps in to save him, and Flair is not happy that Dusty poked his nose in his business. So before anything could be said, all of a sudden, Ole Anderson and Arn, if I remember correctly,
Correct.
jump in the cage and attack him. Then it become a 3-on-1.
Lock the door.
Lock the door. Flair gets on the top rope, jumps down on Dusty's leg and breaks it. Causes a riot. Legit riot.
People are trying to climb up the cage.
The guys can't get out of the cage. You got the wrestlers trying to get in. The bad guys inside are keeping them out. You have fans trying to get inside the cage. We had talked about it on a previous one, on another angle from years before. That happened. I can't remember who we were talking about.
I
but
always
anyway.
thought it felt more real in Southern wrestling when the guys came out in jeans and their cowboy boots.
And no
maybe,
shirt.
Yeah, maybe that's why I like wearing jeans and cowboy boots with no shirt now.
Really?
I'm looking to
That's
do a
the
run-in.
reason.
Well, possibly.
Just waiting for the right time to grab his belt.
Yeah, you gotta take it when you can get it.
Wow. What do you think about that, Heath? He's
What is-
after the belt.
what is happening here?
Oh, he just challenged you. Where you throw down the belt and
you
put the
want-
belt on the line and go 1-on-1.
If you want the strap, you're going to have to come get it.
Well,
Now we know what's going on after this podcast's over. So like we said, the Hard Times promo is what Dusty follows that up with, and it's just an incredible piece of business, as they say.
Look it up.
You know, what's also incredible is his suit jacket and shirt selection. And
It is
that.
about to bust open. It's so tight.
It is. It looks like you after too much boudin.
I got nothing for that. Thank you.
wow.
And then,
Yeah.
of course, the Starrcade match, which is highlighted with Dusty and Flair on top. But like we said, we feel like that is the Magnum and Tully show for just sheer authenticity and violence.
It was violent. I mean, Tully, a baby doll throws in a chair to Tully. Tully breaks off a piece of it. He's going to use it on Magnum. Crowd's going insane. Magnum gets it from him, uses it on Tully, and makes him quit. And it was huge. That was I would say one of just crowning Magnum for future success, obviously.
So the next thing we were going to talk about as we wrap up 85 and this podcast was recently, as we've talked about previously, the Dark Side of the Ring series. There was an episode on Magnum, and a lot of the discussion out of that episode was what if with Magnum? If Magnum wouldn't have been hurt, him sliding into Flair's spot, would that have worked, blah, blah, blah. So my question was, and we can possibly pass this on to the Princes of the Universe nation, however large or small it is, much like the heavyweight title in question. What would have happened instead of that happening to Magnum? How would Vince have handled if Hogan was in a similar accident and Hogan went down? Who does the WWF pull to take Hogan's spot? And is there anybody at that point?
Final question.
A number 2 babyface in WWF. I mean, literally the only one at the time. The IC Intercontinental belt, Tito Santana had it for a little bit. Is he going to be your leader? I don't think so. Savage was about to come in late 85, obviously as a heel. He wasn't, the Randy Savage everybody was going to find out he was going to be in a couple years. So, honestly, I mean, who was it? I mean, Orndorff had turned face in late 85.
I just think it's an interesting because how in that they basically say, Dusty had groomed him and really took his time. So I think it's an interesting subject to think about. If Hogan was hurt and his career ended, where would Vince go? Because there's always the discussion of who made wrestling, Hogan or Vince. If you take Hogan out of that spot, where does Vince go? Because he's changed the business so much and put so much already into Hogan.
Right.
If he goes down in late 85 after WrestleMania 1, after all of this has happened, where does the WWF go?
What if it happened right before WrestleMania and blow everything out of the water? I mean, there is so many what ifs. I mean, for Jim Crockett Promotions, I mean, Dusty bet the farm on Magnum TA. He was the top baby face right under Dusty. He was going to be the next NWA champion. And they bet the farm on him, and they didn't have a plan B when he got hurt. And would they have sold in 2 years?
I think they would have. I think the WWF was too far ahead. I'm just saying, instead of it, I don't think the NWA crashed because of that. It's obviously a lot of other reasons, bad business. But I'm wondering who Vince could have put in Hogan's position and how far would that train have went.
I agree with Heath. I think it would have been falling off the rails by that point. Because they were full steam ahead, but you burn out too early. There's no saving grace right now because they built everything around him.
Well, think about WrestleMania time. So you had Junkyard Dog. He was a gimmick wrestler up in the WWF. Let's face it, he was not going to be the main guy. Andre the Giant was a showcase.
An attraction.
Yeah. He was an attraction. Like I said before, let's see, Ricky Steamboat had come in. Didn't have the charisma like Hogan. No, honestly, I mean, if you really want to go into it, not many people had the charisma that Hogan had. So getting pushed by the WWE was...
You almost wonder if that would have happened, would Vince have went in and took Flair or Dusty?
Supposedly there was speculation that he had talked to Dusty.
He had cut
he had talked
to try to do that.
I can't see Dusty being the main attraction, but, when you're trying to put a worldwide company together, he was one of the biggest attractions.
Or does Vince go in and take Magnum?
True, too.
There you go.
There you go. Something we'll ask the listeners.
So 69 of them.
Yeah, go for it. So let us know. Thanks again, Heath, for guesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wes, for talking so much during this podcast.
Thanks for 50-50 match, Heath. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We'll see you next time on Princes of the Universe.